Hello, peace and long life. Welcome to Enchantment of Eternities, a live discussion continuing to count down my top 25 favorite episodes of a Star Trek, the entire, well, not the entire, yeah, the entire franchise. That's right. I am doing. Anyway, the entire Star Trek franchise. We're up to my number 19, which is the Enterprise episode Kir'shara, and as always, joined by the usual suspects. Joining me, of course, Sister Alyssa. Thanks so much for joining.
Hello, Mark. My name is Talissa because all Vulcan women have a name that has a T and an apostrophe, except for Savick. Except for Savick, every single other one has a T apostrophe, and I don't know why. So, but I'm Talissa today. So live long and prosper.
Yes, indeed. And also Darrin, of course, joining us once again. Thanks so much, Darrin.
Oh, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be here. It's so funny that I was joking on the last show, last one of these we did. Like, oh, is there going to be an Enterprise? And you're like, there is, and it's the next one up. So I'm really excited to jump into this tonight.
So I'm actually going to give a bit of a spoiler for my top 25. I'm going to tease a little bit. There are two more Enterprise episodes in my top 25, and they're both in my top 10.
Ooh.
So
I know what one of them is for definite sure.
Yeah, yes. So so let's get into Kir'shara. So I chose this episode because I think I'm following pretty much the same rules as Alyssa did for her top 100, where if it has a separate name, then it's its own episode. But if it's like a two-parter with the same name, and I count it as the same part, this is part of a three-parter, but I'm counting them all differently. But it's basically there to represent the three-parter. It is my favorite of the three, but I do love this three-parter as a whole. I think it all worked for me, but this one was my favorite because it sort of resolved everything in really epic fashion. I think, and I think this was interesting getting. This is what I love about Manny Koto when he took over for season 4 of Enterprise, is that he's such a Star Trek geek, and he made Enterprise actually feel like a Star Trek prequel, which it did not in its first 2 seasons, which is one of the many, 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 many issues I had with the first 2 seasons. And here it has a lot of callbacks. Again, I don't see it as like mindless fan service. I see it as because it serves a greater purpose and a greater story, and also he's kind of fixing some of the mistakes of the first 2 seasons, which we'll get to later. But I also love the storyline with the Kir'shara. It's very fantasy-esque, and the whole thing of the war and the corrupt Vulcan trying to start a war with Andoria, that storyline worked for me. And I thought the first 2 episodes were good too, because it was good build up, that they didn't just jump right into it, that they established who the Sirenites were, that they were a rogue faction that followed Sirach's teachings, and that Archer, as my screen name says, gets Sirach stuck in his head. So all of that really established those first 2 episodes. I think did a good job of establishing that. In this third episode, I think did a spectacular job of paying it off. So that's what I think of these episodes. So Darrin, let's go first for your opinion. What was your thoughts on these episodes?
Yeah, this was definitely a fun one, and I see with this whole arc, as we're dealing with a lot of the Vulcan religion and the teachings, and who is teaching things right, which the minute you go into interpretations of religious dogma, always starts to get me excited. I love when we start kind of delving into these small little bits. Plus we get Archer doing a lot of his fisticuffs, which is always a big blast. I think he gets a couple of really big fights right here, and now he's powered with purpose, so that's always a bit of fun bit. I like seeing the Enterprise doing other things as well. Is like, to me, in fact, this is really one of the real beginnings of, I think, the Federation, is when we deal with kind of a peace between Andorra and Vulcan, and then later on we have the really more of the the ones when the Romulans pop back in their ship, and that really becomes another really big foundational stone. So this is kind of an exciting episode in that setting up as well. Plus, it's got Jeffrey Combs in his Shram, and anytime you do that, I am all over it. I love Jeffrey. I'm so excited every time that he comes in. He is just, this guy has been in every Star Trek series. Though I don't think he was actually in Next Generation, but he did audition for Riker originally, which is, and Jonathan Frakes remembered his audition, and he pulled him in for when he directed the DS9 episode where he first came in. So the connection with Star Trek is long and hard, and I think this is kind of a perfect character wrap up for him. And I'm always excited every time Shram is included in an episode. And you know, we get Gary Graham. Am I getting his name right? The actor who plays
Yeah.
They have such a wonderful bit here, which I know that we'll definitely get into. But again, another long-standing TV actor. So there was just so much to be offered in with this episode, and I think it really wrapped things up with humanity again, ready to stand on their own.
Oh, so I have to address Brandon in the chat. He says Manny Koto died in the last couple of days. I hadn't realized that. I had heard he passed away. I didn't realize it was this recently. So yeah, that sucks. Rest in peace. Definitely the man who saved Enterprise. But anyway, Alyssa, your thoughts on the episode?
Yeah, I was actually going to comment on Manny Cardo too, not knowing what Brandon just put in the chat. That season 4, he definitely made season 4 very, very prequely, but I think it was very hit and miss. I think this little trilogy was one of the hits. I think this really tied things together well and connected the dots really well. I think, explaining why the Klingons don't have ridges in the original series, explaining the Andorian, or the Orion female sex slaves, that backfired. That was a huge, huge misstep. So it wasn't always perfect, but when he hit, he really hit well. And yeah, as I said, this is the one that really connects the dots between the asshole Vulcans from season 1 and 2, and the Vulcans that we know from Spock's time in the original series and every time after that. And I don't know that they would have connected those dots without Manny Koto. So good on him for doing that, because it worked really well. And I love this idea that everything that we know about the Vulcans and we've accepted about the Vulcans and their culture from Spock was started off as this terrorist group or splinter group, or this fringe group, and this shows how that way of thinking becomes into the mainstream, and it's really good. I really like it a lot. I don't have it as that. We'll talk at the end, I guess, exactly where I had this in my top 100. Not nearly as high as this. It is because I have one major issue with this three-parter. And Mark has heard me rant about it before, but we'll get to it. It's one of the topics I know we're going to cover, so I'll save it for when we get there. But I do have one issue that makes this not as high as number 19 for me. But other than that one issue, I still think that this was a really strong trilogy, and this was a really strong finish to that trilogy that overall I really quite enjoy.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And so in the chat, Jordan Johnson says, I love the comparison that Vulcans make to us. 1,800 years versus 100 years, for example, reminds me of Q kind of saying the same thing, that humanity is moving too fast. And he's referencing a line in the first part of the three-parter where Saval's talking to Forrest right before he died, saying that the same amount of progress the Vulcans did in 1,800 years, the humans did in 100 years. I think that has more to do with the fact that Roddenberry set Star Trek too early in the future, but whatever. Anyway, so yeah, let's go ahead and jump into the episode. First thing I want to talk about is Archer having the Katra of Sirach. I thought so. This, of course, happened in the previous episode, but or the first part actually, and then it was explored more in the previous episode. But here is he's full on going like doing Vulcan nerve pinches and like knowing where all the things are, and I really like this. This was I don't know if this was the first time a Katra was referenced since Star Trek 3. I think it may have been, because let's all be perfectly honest here. The Katra was made up as an excuse to bring Spock back to life. But it's good because it's a part of canon, and they used it here to good effect. I think it's a really interesting concept that this, Vulcan Jesus basically is still like alive in some form, like through like a tradition of these Vulcans to carry his Katra, to sort of learn from him. Now, we didn't really get any interactions with Archer and Sirach in this episode. That was the previous episode, but those were cool too. And it was interesting getting that Sirach chose Archer specifically because he was an outsider, because Vulcan had become so corrupt. He needed sort of an outsider, and that's why he didn't want, when T'Pol tried to remove the Katra from him, he refused to go because he wanted it to be in the human, which is an interesting concept, and I think comes into play here. So I'll open this up. I guess I'll start with you, Alyssa. Your thoughts on the whole Katra business?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is the first time they did Katras in Star Trek 3 that I can think of. They did Pon farr like 8 times. But I don't think that they did the Katra. And I would honestly, even though it was invented, as you said, to just bring Spock back to life, I would much rather them explore the Katra than Pon farr like every 5 minutes. And especially when they do it as well as they did it here. And I agree with pretty much everything that you say there. That I found this really interesting, and it's interesting that he wanted to connect to humans, because that, again, that's connecting the dots. That is showing that the Vulcans are now. It's the beginning of them opening up to humans. When Sirach is like, no, it's important that my Katra isn't a human. That's opening up the Vulcans, like starting to accept humans instead of just being assholes to humans all the time. So I love all that, and Scott Bakula gets a lot of flack for his acting, and sometimes it's well deserved. But sometimes I really like him, and I really liked him in these couple episodes, and especially this one.
Yeah, he had that kind of vibe of like all knowing, all seeing, like has that extra, like played the fact that he had this knowledgeable Vulcan in his head really well. I think that did come off. But anyway, Darrin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think he calls it like a certain assuredness or calm that he mentions in the midst of the episode, which it is. And there's something about having that focused purpose, which I think is builds very well here. And you're right, it is an interesting choice to go, I think, into a human at this point. But I mean, in some ways, it is also perfect Star Trek. This is the captain, so they usually get to have these types of adventures. He doesn't get a flute out of it, but he gets a nice little stand, and that's very pretty. So that's also very cool. Plus, I think in some ways there's a healing aspect to it because of so much xenophobia that started to instill in him from the Xindi arc of season 3. this is him really stepping forward into that next real negotiator, the ambassador, the one who's making the connections and bringing people together. And the fact that that's also part of him now, kind of healing all of his insides and seeing the world through different eyes in a way. I think it's a great step for Archer as a character to really move forward. So yeah, I feel like in a lot of ways, I mean, we even have Paul, there was a lot of healing done in this episode for much of the soon-to-be Federation and the characters as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right. So I want to talk about another sort of shout out to call back to the original series. And that's T'Pau, which I don't think I realized when I first saw this. I was like, does that name, because it sounds like T'Pol, all their names sound similar. But as I rewatched Amok Time, I realized T'Pau was the Vulcan character who proceeded over Spock's wedding in Amok Time, and Kirk, they sort of renowned her as a very sort of well-known Vulcan diplomat, like a Federation symbol that's like, oh my god, because all she had to do, because Starfleet was gonna like drum Kirk out for going to Vulcan against orders, but all she had to do was like throw her weight around us, and they just let everything go. And they're like, oh wow, that's T'Pau. She's really powerful or whatever. And when I go back and watch Amok Time, that actually has a lot more meaning now after seeing this trilogy, after seeing sort of her beginnings, as she began as a sort of I guess she was accused of being a terrorist, but more of an outcast, I would say. But it seems like by the end of the episode, she starts to become part of the main government, which has shifted and is going to, and you would assume from how revered she is in Amok Time, that she's one of the key figures in helping push Vulcan up to be a better planet, or be the Vulcan that we know from the original series. And so, and plus her in this trilogy, because she starts off as not trusting Archer, not trusting humans, and you see sort of the, even in this little trilogy, the little journey she goes through, that by the end she completely, like the fact that she accepts the fact that Serac had chose Archer, and so learns to trust Archer and go along with him. So yeah, I think that actually was really, really cool. That's something I really like as well. Darrin, your thoughts on T'Pau?
Yeah, I totally did not make that. It's been a while since I've seen Amok Time, so that's kind of cool. But I do know the character, I know the interactions that you're talking about there. So it's one of the fun things that, if done right, really build out the world of any kind of series or things like that. And I love these small little things. Like there's just little connections here and here, the little callbacks, Easter eggs, as it were, that flesh everything's out if you're paying attention and if you're a big fan. And if not, it doesn't really make a big impact either way. And yeah, this is, again, we've got a lot of healing and overcoming of prejudice kind of through this big 3-season arc. And T'Pau is one of those characters as well that has to start seeing things through a different lens. But again, I think really all of the characters in this, her, T'Pau, all of the people, and Archer as well, and even the Council and Vulcan as a whole. In fact, everybody does, even if you get over the Andorians and such. This is all about seeing things through new eyes and seeing a larger picture of this. So, yeah, I wasn't sure when her character started, but I really did enjoy her character and her arc by the time we got through this episode.
Yeah, and real quick shout out to Brandon Neilhouse in the chat for the super chat. Thanks so much, saying because I can still interact with the live stream. There you go. I'm glad you can be here. Anyway, Alyssa, your thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't realize I didn't make the connection to Amok Time until recent years, and it really does add depth to that character. And a lot of times, when you have these prequels, so this is good prequeling, because a lot of times when you have these prequels, they're just like throw in a character from the known product and go, oh, hey, he's from that other show, and this doesn't really fit, and it doesn't really make sense. But this is a prequeling done right, because it does add depth to what we see of T'Pol in Amok Time, as you were talking about, Mark. So I remember thinking before, when I had seen this episode previously, that I found this character interesting, but so much more depth is added to this character when you do make that connection and realize who she actually is, and how everything gets started, to get to the point where we are 100 years later in Amok Time. And again, great job just connecting the dots from the less than stellar way the Vulcans were handled in the first couple seasons to where we get to the original series. It's really done extraordinarily well, and I think the way that they handle T'Pol and use that character, and not just to go, hey, she's from that other show, I think it's really effective.
Yeah, they really don't draw attention to the fact, like, you have literally had to be like a Star Trek nerd to even catch it.
I didn't even know until recently.
Yeah. Which is cool. Like that, it's not like all the other, like, oh, look, it's the thing.
Just a flashing light as she went, like, oh, hey, remember her? Yeah,
he's from another movie.
Yeah. All right. So next topic I want to talk about is something I have yet to hear anyone else bring up. And sometimes I think I'm just crazy here, because I think I'm the only one who drew this connection. But I see this episode in particular, well, the three-parter, but this episode in particular, as a huge commentary on the Iraq War. Especially, I'm really struck by it. Mind you, this episode came out in 2005. When the Iraq War was still in the height, and this is when the year started to become unpopular. And the beginning scene when the Vulcans are there planning the invasion of Andoria, where Vlas keeps insisting, oh, they have weapons of mass destruction. And we know that they don't have these weapons of mass destruction. And the other Vulcan minister is like, well, what if they don't? It's like, well, we can't take the risk if they do have the weapons of mass destruction. It's like George Bush was speaking to me in this scene. Like, I can't watch this scene without that sort of influence. And also, like, you see that we find out at the end of the episode that the Vulcan, what Floss, who was in charge, was being controlled by corrupting influence, the Romulans, which could be, an analogy for the, oil industries or whatever that was influenced the Iraq War. And then you have the Sirenites, which could be an analogy for protesters who were against the Iraq War, who were very marginalized and attacked during the Iraq War, like extremely, like, trying to hidden, like, apparently there were more protests in the Iraq War than there were for the Vietnam War, but you wouldn't know it from the media coverage because they very minimalized it and really tried to discredit anyone who was against the Iraq War. And so that seems like Vlas was doing the same thing about Sirenites, because they were all peaceful, so he tried to sort of blame them for the attack and tried to wipe them out or whatever, which is, the analogy starts to get a bit crazy there, but I don't know. Am I crazy? Is it just me, or do you think there's something here? Darrin, we'll start with you.
What? Star Trek tying into a real world political issue and making a commentary on it? That's crazy talk. What? The media downplaying the concerns of the everyday person because it's more politically interesting? Oh, yeah. If you hadn't said it, I would not have thought about it. But then again, by the time I saw this episode, it wasn't during the time, so I wasn't like in the midst of all of that. It was many, many years later. so I wasn't necessarily of the mindset of being in war, but it does make sense that we are having some sort of tie-in. Though I got to say, was it Voss playing the most un-Vulcan Vulcan? I mean, he was just like, but they could be doing some things. He was very pushy in all of that.
Mhm.
But again, I think you also have, in some sense, and further on, even in the midst of that, a government structure that's designed to support whoever is in charge. And he was considered to be the most effective person for leadership or whatever. I can't remember what how he had been described before. But yeah, that he was basically the best person for the job, and he is the one that's all scheming and behind all of the lying. But we have a governmental structure, the rest of the council, that has to support him, even if they don't maybe fully believe in what he's doing. Because as you're right, the tale of, well, but they could have something, and our intel says this. We won't tell them that it got blown up. But yeah, they had this stuff. So yeah, while I would not have thought about it at the time, this is a perfect thing for Star Trek to do, and I can see those little connections that you have. Yeah, once you get to the Searnites, it starts to get a little loose, but the overall statement of a government pursuing war for its own means and subverting and villainizing anyone who opposes it, the French,
Yeah.
you know, we can, it's a perfect thing for Star Trek to do.
Well, I think the WMDs is where that's what struck me. But anyway, Alyssa, your thoughts on this?
Well, I like Star Trek so much better before it got all woke. They went woke in these episodes for the very first time and never made political commentary before. But yeah, I remember you mentioning, I think you mentioned this when we did our Enterprise discussion, and prior to that, I hadn't really thought about it, but makes total sense. And actually, after you brought it up, and then, I realized, actually, yeah, it is. I mean, I can't believe I didn't see it. It's almost too on the nose. It is so on the nose with the Iraq War trilogy. It has to be that. But so it's interesting that I had never thought of it that way before you brought it up. But yeah, I think it is totally a dead-on analogy. And Darrin kind of hit on my one big complaint, but I know that's going to be one of the topics, so we'll get it. Like the mustache twirly villain, like that somehow people were buying as an actual logical Vulcan, which I do not buy. But as an Iraq war analyst, as a Dick Cheney figure, sure, I can buy him as that. But as a logical Vulcan, no. I think that analogy is dead on, and I don't know why no more people don't notice it or point it out, because it's almost a little too dead on, if anything.
Yeah, I think like the Zindi arc was obviously a 9/11 Afghanistan analogy, but this one is where I think they made the Iraq War analogy. But so
which is, I have to say, comes a long way from when the show started, when, as you've pointed out, that Tucker seems very much to be a George W. Bush like figure, and they're kind of playing George W. Bush, whereas now things have, which is very anti-Star Trek, in my opinion, if you're glorifying pro-war Republicans. But yeah, so now we're getting, my jokes about it being woke for the first time aside, now we're actually getting to what Star Trek is really about.
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of the reason why I never really liked Tucker as a character. Anyway, so yeah, let's so then we get the Enterprise goes to the Andorians to warn them. They go to Shran, which part of me was like, well, they keep going to the same guy so they could have Jeffrey Combs in the episode, but then it's like, well, it does make sense because he's the Andorian they know, and if they want to go, make a connection to him, it does make sense they would go to the person that they already have a connection with. But Shran as Darren was saying, very interesting character. I think definitely I would probably say my favorite character of the show. And it's interesting because he's dynamic where he doesn't trust them instantly. It's not that he doesn't trust Tucker, the Enterprise, it's that he doesn't trust Saval, and having Saval there makes him think that because of their history and the history they have with Vulcans, he thinks this is maybe a trap or that Saval is misleading them, and so he captures Saval and tortures him. Now, if I'm being honest, this is probably my least favorite part of the episode. It doesn't bother me too much for me to like bring this episode down or whatever, but I do think these scenes maybe drag on too long, or maybe Shran is being a bit obtuse by not buying it. But some of the scenes, some like the acting, as Darren mentioned, from Gary Graham in this is actually amazing, and I do love the things that like that he was saying it when Shran was just pushing him for information, and he goes like tells the story instead about this Vulcan who thought there was a cloud coming in the city. He was like, but it was an army, and just the way he said that was like so intense, and it was like, and his name now means fool, and so will yours. And that was just really cool. So so ultimately, these scenes, because of stuff like that, I think they do sort of earn their place in the episode, but I do think maybe they dragged on a little bit too long. Alyssa, your thoughts on this?
So I'll be honest with you. So this is the one episode that we're doing in this top 25 coverage that I didn't watch like the night before. I haven't watched it since I did my Enterprise rewatch a few months ago. And to be perfectly honest with you, I kind of forgot about these parts. And I think that's because they're forgettable. Like, I just don't know how necessary they were, other than to like, oh, here's Shran, here's Jeffrey Combs, good acting, this is cool. We have Saval, we're gonna have some sympathy for this guy because we've hated him for 3 seasons. And I mean, I don't know. I guess I can't say they were totally unnecessary scenes, but they were, for me, forgettable because I just completely even forgot that they were in there. Yeah, there's great acting. You are, as Darren mentioned, like Jeffrey Combs. Always love anything that he's in. We need more live action Jeffrey Combs, by the way. We've only gotten him in Lower Decks. Like, we need a live action appearance arrangement.
I wouldn't mind more of Artemis as well.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we probably will get some next season. But in any case, yeah, it's great from that standpoint. I'm not sure if we needed these scenes or not. I don't know, but I don't hate them. They're not what brings the episodes down for me. But yeah, I don't think it was a strong suit of the episode either.
Are you saying that enhanced interrogation techniques are not endemic for a series that may be talking about the Iraq War?
Good point. Good point.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that this I think went on a little bit too long as well. It's like they kind of hit their point maybe by the second time they came back in. But they're underlying the distrust between the Andorians and the Vulcans, which it has to add that extra bit of drama in here. Though to me, it was also, there's kind of the fun thing because Zaval, you're right, was such an ass for the first couple of seasons. And really, it's once Force saves his life. And he goes and he has that little discussion with Archer, a couple episodes ago in the beginning of this 3-episode arc, where he really becomes really softened to the humans, that realization, like the old person who we've done our back and forth died saving my life. And I think it's really given him his new perspective on things. So I've really kind of enjoyed his bit. So now going up with Shram, and they're able to touch on their previous relationships. I was always straightforward with you. Did I ever deceive you at any point? No, I didn't. So believe me, now, they have a history on top, which is like the mistakes that you can make when you're there's so much of a lack of trust that you will torture somebody who is trying to help you because you don't trust that they're not trying to deceive you again. And at least I do appreciate when he wrapped it up. That was what he says. I tell the Enterprise we'll send him back. A lesser person would have lied just to have gotten me to stop. Just his realization is like he's been straight with me the entire time, and that convinces him to really make the big move, and I think that's what propels really the Andorians and the Vulcans to peace. While this is kind of the worst part, I think it proved to both of them that they can move forward from this. That he can trust a Vulcan, and thus maybe he can trust Vulcan as a larger entity.
Yeah, that's a good point about Savul. I think, and this is another thing that Manny Koto was saving from turning him into a more, and you can see it as sort of a journey that he goes throughout the show. Now, he didn't appear in season 3 other than that alternate timeline, but when we see him in the start of season 4, I think he really begins that journey of understanding humans more, and the Admiral Forrest sacrificing himself to save his life was definitely a huge push in that direction. So by the time we get to this episode, we're actually on his side, and he's not the asshole anymore.
Well, I will say though, I mean, this is more the fault of a previous episode. I think it was that second episode, the one where the one with Archer and the female captain and
Home.
Home, that was kind of just like family in a lot of ways. I remember in that episode he was being an asshole. Then all of a sudden at the very end he's like, "No, I'm your friend." I was like, "Okay, that was just like out of nowhere." So this is kind of more developing his turn a little bit more, than showing us that he has gradually changed as a character. But in that previous episode, I didn't love that episode. I think you liked it more than I did.
I did. I love that episode.
He just all of a sudden out of nowhere is Archer's friend. I was like, where the hell did that come from? But this does a much better job of developing his character, which I really appreciate.
All right, so I want to talk about the part where T'Pol, and Archer are walking through the desert, through the forge, trying to get back to the capital to present the Kir'shara, and they're attacked by these Vulcans. And do we know that the actor who played the lead Vulcan here was none other than Todd Stachwich, so I'm saying his name correctly, who plays Captain Shaw in Picard season 3. This is his first appearance in Star Trek, and I didn't catch that until he pointed that out in the interview, and I went back and watched. I was like, "Yeah, that is him." And then when I was watching this scene, I was expecting him to say no or whatever, and like, "You guys all about action or whatever." But anyway, so yeah, no, but this is a cool scene because it's God damn it, it's so getting mixed up. T'Pol gets hurt, knocked out, and so they're sort of faced with a choice because Archer is like all about, no, we can't leave her, we have to go after her. But T'Pol just throws Archer down this, the tunnel to be like, no, getting the Kir'shara is safe is more important because these guys are going to destroy it if they get their hands on it, which we do find out that at the end of the episode that Captain Shaw actually is a Romulan, so that is true. They would have destroyed the Kir'shara if they got their hands on it. And so she sort of made that choice for him. But then Archer decides to go back for her anyway. But they do get the better of the Vulcans. They set this sort of cold trap where they have that little metal that they set up for in the early episode, the rocks that make the metal go and shine them and trap the Vulcans and get the better of them, and found out T'Pol was taken to the capital, which is where they're going anyway. So, and that was an interesting character moment, I thought, for Archer, that he was willing to risk, where T'Pau was being more pragmatic, but he was willing to risk everything to try to save T'Pol, and it speaks to the connection that they had. So I thought this was all pretty cool. Darren, we'll start with your thoughts on this one.
Well, this was kind of one of those interesting little arcs where really I got it a little more understanding the second time that I watched it. Because T'Pol is at the beginning of this episode very much like, I don't want to listen to my mom's religion. I don't want to look into things. Even though Archer is like, hey, you may want to take a look at some of this stuff now that he's got Surak in his head. And then she gets fixed. She gets that little mind meld correction, which I thought was kind of a very cool thing, of a way to sort of literally open her mind to a new point of view, in that sense, and get cured of, was it Beren syndrome? Something that they called from the
oh yes, yeah,
bad,
I can't remember what it was called. Yeah.
Mind meld. To once she's captured by the Romulans, I mean the Vulcans, the guards, she's like, I'm a Cyrenite. I would never lie. Like, where did this switch suddenly come from? But when you see that again, that kind of opening of mind, that seeing things, that having to sort of grasp onto stuff, I think it may also have been just a move to, keep her going. And like, Vulcans typically don't lie anyway, so I don't know why Cyrenites specifically are non-lying non-liars. But I did, again, it was fun. I do like, it reminded me of the Star Wars garbage bit when she threw him down the hole. Where are you going? Down into the hole, into the garbage chute, flyboy. But yeah, and you have the standard, the Star Trek, we don't leave our people behind. We have our connection, and that does end up working out very well for them. And you get the call back to the cool little, like you said, that whatever stuff in the walls that electrocutes all the metal things. So you get a fun little trap too, which I don't know if you're talking about using the terrain against your enemy, if that is furthering along with your Iraq War comparison, but yeah, it was a good little bit, and you got some nice fights out of it. So what else could you ask from Star Trek?
Yeah, I like this too, and I think Archer's devotion to Paul is to Paul, not to Pal, is very well earned at this point. That over the course of the series, they do have this connection. Now, since it has been a little while, I am curious how much the Katra of Surak was a part of this. At the very least, Surak, didn't intervene and prevent Archer from doing that. I don't know. Do you remember, Mark, if that's like, did that come into play here at all? The fact that he still has Surak's Katra, was that like?
They didn't mention it. Like, you could infer one way or another if it influenced his decision, but they didn't state it outright.
Because at the very least, he was not like, the Katra didn't like intervene or tried to like, we have to go here. Like,
yeah, didn't do that. And definitely, I would surmise that it helped his skills in fighting the Vulcans, as we do see him do the Vulcan nerve pinch several times, and T'Pau even says, "Oh, your method is improving."
yeah, for sure. But go ahead.
It seemed like the last episode was the more internal journey of the two of them, and this was all outside, just what everybody was seeing. So I think there was even comments, so that way you couldn't see any of the comments or discussions that might be happening, though they seemed to imply that they sort of still were gently, or just helping focus. But
well, then Surak was all for him going back for T'Pol, which he does anyway, which is true to character and true to the relationship. So yeah, that worked for me. And yeah, I also thought of the Star Wars trash compactor thing when she just kind of throws him down in that thing. But it all worked out because, yeah, like you said, they were all going to the same place anyway.
That actually kind of scared me, especially well, at least this time when I watched the fact that they threw themselves down that tunnel. Like they don't know where that's going. That could like lead to a dead end and get small, and they get trapped in there and suffocate to death for all they know.
Well, and I think he actually like broke through several stalactites, or I guess styrofoam stalactites while
Yeah.
going down there. Because I was like, oh yeah, just the impaled would be. But hey, I don't know. Maybe it's a Vulcan thing. You have to know the terrain.
Perhaps. I do want to call out a super chat from Jordan Johnson. Thanks so much for the super chat, saying, what was the name of the Vulcan ship in Unification, by the way? That one that was stolen. Another T name. Yes, it was another T name, but I do not remember what that was. My Star Trek trivia is not that good. Anyway, cool. So yeah, maybe I'll look it up later. Anyway, okay. So now let's get into this topic that Alyssa's been dying to talk about. Administrator Vloss defying logic to start a war. I think I don't know. I personally didn't have as big of an issue as Alyssa does, but I can see how this he is definitely not being Vulcan. Like he is definitely showing clear anger, particularly in the final scene where Archer shows up and like he's even yelling. It's like we can't let him do this. And at least I would have expected some of the other Vulcans to like point out it's like you are acting very illogically, like but I kind of like the dynamic between that other minister, Kavak, who eventually takes over. I recognize both these actors, by the way. The one who plays Vloss played Admiral Layton in Deep Space Nine, which is also an asshole figure that tried to take over start a war. And then there was the other actor who plays Minister Kavak. He was in an earlier episode of Enterprise, and I'd seen him in a couple of B movies. But anyway, I thought their interaction was cool, and I like how Kavak started becoming more and more sort of weary of Vloss and sort of questioning his logic. And I think the further we got to Enterprise, stop trying to stop this war, bring in the Kir'shara, proving that this war isn't necessary. I think the more Vloss's argument fell apart, and the more he was exposed as just a warmonger, and and that's what led to Kavak finally turning on him. So that I liked how that storyline progressed. Even though, yeah, he was a bit. Maybe a bit too illogical to be a Vulcan, but it is revealed at the end that he's an agent for the Romulans, so that could explain that he's all about Romulan unification, why he's not really embracing the philosophy of logic. Anyway, Alyssa, I shall let your rant begin.
Well, you always call him an agent for the Romulans. My interpretation was he is a Romulan.
See, I didn't get that from watching this episode.
And the reason I guess that I think that I was like, oh, well, at least that explains his behavior, because he acts like a Romulan 100% the whole time, like he's full on Romulan. So if he is Romulan, I'm like, oh, of course he is, because that's how he was behaving for the whole three-parter. And it's not just how he's behaving in this particular three-parter, but it is the idea that this guy was able to rise to the highest office in in Vulcan and the people that are supposed to be logical. And yes, I know, I get it, that they're more corrupt. They're not the Vulcans that we know in the TOS era. That's what this trilogy is all about, and getting us there. But the fact, even with all that considered, the fact that they would ever allow a guy who basically acts like a Romulan, whether he is a Romulan or just a Romulan agent, he flat out acts like a Romulan, doesn't even pretend to be logical. Like, he doesn't even try to be logical. He doesn't ever use the word logical. He's yelling, he's angry, he's like, yes, we must go to war! And he's ranting and raving, and it just, how do they not see it? It just drives me crazy. Like, it almost as bad to me as another episode of Star Trek that I've ranted about, data lore, where Lore is pretending to be Data, and he's so obviously Lore. When the crystalline entity comes up and he goes, beautiful, isn't it? And nobody notices. Like, it is just as bad as that to me, that this guy would get to rise as far as he did, and he goes unchallenged. I mean, they do kind of half-assedly question him, like, oh, I know, are you sure this is the right thing? Of course, this is the right thing to do. Oh, okay, well, that seems logical to me. I'm like, what? Like, I just find the whole thing unrealistic, and it really, really drags the episode down for me. The whole trilogy down for me, that I just can't get past this. That it is a little too much. They could have turned the volume down on him a little bit, like at least have him pretend to be logical. I think Jordan Johnson mentioned earlier, well, the Vulcans were always not acting like Vulcans. Wasn't that the point? But at least they would say things like, this is logical. Like, they would try to put forward a logical face and pretend to be logical. This guy doesn't even remotely pretend to be logical. So they could have, I mean, there's a way they could have done it and turned down the volume and made him a little more palatable for me. But I just can't handle it. It's way too over the top for me.
Well, I do think he does ask at some point, is it logical to wait until they attack us first? Yeah, maybe not that last part, but yeah, this was, perhaps this is just showing that Vulcans are so committed to logic, they can't really even recognize emotion anymore. They don't spend time with humans. They have nothing to really compare it to. I don't know. To me, it's always actually kind of a interesting journey to see, whenever new actors come on, how they do their Vulcan. And I guess maybe it's being spoiled by Leonard Nimoy as kind of setting it up. But there always seems to be a little bit more emotion than logic through a lot of these guys. Sometimes it's like, we're attempting to be very logical, but we're very emotional behind our eyes. But everything will just stay very even when we speak. And then we do that. So I'm used to a certain kind of breadth, but yes, Talissa, you are quite correct. It is over the top at a lot of times. I don't know if he would be Romulan, just because I would imagine you'd have to be kind of base to rise far enough through things and political connections. But for somebody that may be corrupted by interesting thoughts, in his youth 200 years ago, I forget how long Vulcans live, that he might have gotten sort of influenced, and then they help with their rise. I don't know if it isn't generally known at this stage that Romulans are Vulcans who left the homeworld. I don't know if that's been established yet. So
no, it hasn't.
Yeah, so I don't think there'd be any reason for them to suspect that he would be Romulan or anything like that. But yeah, it is one of the lower points. I get why they do that, and you've got to have the kind of fervor to drive this point through this episode and through this arc. But I did find his acts very illogical.
I will say I do agree, Talissa, that they should have toned it down a bit. that they overdid it. It doesn't affect my enjoyment of the episode as much as it does with you, but yeah, I do agree that they definitely overdid it. Although the one thing I would say is that I think that they do ramp it up gradually. That he starts to get worse and worse, and by the time he's screaming and yelling through a temper tantrum, that's when all the other Vulcans turned on him because they can see that he's really insane.
It took them a long. No, he was ranting and raving for a while before they finally turned on him. They kept going along with him even while he was acting like that for a little while, until he eventually just completely flipped his lid. They were like, maybe we should not follow him anymore.
Yeah,
it took way too long, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, cool. So, let's see where we at. Oh, let's talk about Commander Tucker. Now, as I mentioned, is a character I typically don't care for. I kind of like him in this episode. I thought he did a pretty good job in command of the Enterprise. I particularly like the scene where Reed is questioning his orders, because Reed's actually the acting first officer in this case, which is I thought was an interesting dynamic we didn't get very often. And Reed was questioning the fact that Tucker was defying orders because they'd been ordered to return to Earth, but instead he's going to Andor to warn them, which could be seen as betraying their humanity's main allies, and how Tucker's risking everything. And Tucker basically dismisses Reed's you're dismissed. This is what we need to do. And it pays off for him. And he risks the Enterprise in several instances. First of all, going after Shran's ship and attacking it to get to Saval back when they abducted Saval. But then, when the two fleets, the Andorian Vulcan fleets, meet up, he puts Enterprise smack dab in the middle of those two fleets, which is risky as hell, but is a way to try to delay the fighting. And I do like how, the Vulcans at first were don't fire on the Enterprise until they fire first, and so they were not firing them at all. But as soon as Enterprise fired on the Vulcan ship, they're like, "All right, destroy that fucker." And again, it was very, very risky thing, but I thought he handled himself well. So I actually kind of liked him in this episode. Darrin, we'll start with you.
Well, I think I've got a slightly better opinion of Commander Tucker than you. I've kind of liked his arc, and I actually do like the arc with him and T'Pol through this season. And I think it really pays off pretty well by the second to last episode. We won't talk about the last one. So I kind of enjoyed him in this position, and I think what he tells Saval, really the main motivation for, I think, really all of his choices is it's what the captain would have done. This is what Archer would have done. So in a way, that's sort of what he commits to almost in everything. What would Archer do? Well, the Andorians, we know Shram. Let's go talk to him. We don't want these people fighting. We got to put ourselves in the middle there and try and hold off this battle for as long as we can, because we're the only kind of neutral ship in the area. And again, we're starting to lay that foundation for the future Federation here at this point, with all of these choices and things as well. So I really like Tucker in this. I think that he performed well. It's interesting you talk about Reed, because Reed is probably one of my lesser favorite characters on the show. And it's nothing against the actor or any of that. I don't know. He's always kind of annoying. But as his job as first officer, he's supposed to throw out these options and these things and to question the captain. So it makes sense why he would kind of do it in this one. But yeah, I think this all works out really well. And again, it gives Trip a chance to sit in the chair and to make those decisions and to play his part while Archer's off. But again, he's doing it because this is what Archer would do. And I think that's what's driving him for all of his choices here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You bring up a good point that he's doing it because that's what Archer would do, which explains why he's actually doing good captaining. And I know, Mark, you've complained that Archer isn't always a great captain, but I think that's more in the first couple seasons. I think there are some episodes in the third and fourth season where Archer is a good captain. And I think Tucker doing what Archer would do, is doing the right thing here. And I do agree with you, Mark. He's not, I don't think I dislike him quite as much as you do, because I never really saw the George W. Bush thing until you pointed it out. But he's never been my favorite character. He's definitely done some dumbass things. And then at least alternate timeline trip captain from Twilight was the dumbest captain in history of Starfleet. It drove me crazy how stupid he was. But even in the prime timeline, he has not always been the smartest or made the smartest decisions. But here, this was one of his stronger episodes, I think, and this whole arc going back to the other episodes, I think is definitely one of his strongest. So, yeah, I actually like Tucker a lot and the storyline as well.
All right, cool. So let's talk about the big ooh ah moment where Archer brings in the Kir'shara and turns it, and it lights up the room, and everyone's like, "Oh wow, look at the Kir'shara!" And they're playing this majestic music, like ah. Now, part of me thinks, well, this is a bit cheesy, and part of me thinks, well, this is epic fantasy. I love it. So I'm kind of conflicted on they kind of mentioned what the Kir'shara was, and they even had a scene right before T'Pol and Archer were going to show up at the Capitol, and Archer's like, do you really think just showing him this ancient artifact is going to stop them from fighting a war? And she's like, yeah, it's going to make, the Vulcans see that that this has been lost and it really exists because it was seen as a myth, and it shows that the Sirenites were right all along, I guess, or that they should follow Sirach's teachings of peace. And I guess they were more interested in trying to interpret this artifact and start a war, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if they've properly explained why simply showing this artifact stopped the war, but it looked cool. And and this is when Velas really lost his shit and started like, no, you must destroy him, and the guy just shot him. I'm like, thank God, yes, shoot that fucker. And so part of me thinks it was a little cheesy and unearned, but part of me is like, it's pretty cool. So I don't know. Alyssa, we'll start with you on this one.
I really liked it, actually. I don't know. I never even really thought about it being fantasy-like until you brought it up, and that makes sense. I definitely think that it is very fantasy-like, but I also feel that it's grounded in Star Trek. Like it definitely is effective in connecting those dots, as I've been talking about, to the Vulcans from the first two seasons to the Vulcans that we get to in the TOS era. So I don't know. It really worked for me. I think that having this big moment to connect those dots, I don't have a problem with that. I think that because we do know that then there's another 100 years of gradual, a gradual process and a lot of work. I don't think, at least the way that I read it, I don't think that them just showing that going, I'm like, oh, okay, well now everything is now we're just going to be exactly like the Spock TOS Vulcans, like instantly. The way that I read it anyway, that there's still a lot of work to do. There's going to be struggles. But this was the turning point, and I buy it as that turning point. So it worked for me, and as you said, it was pretty cool. So I kind of liked it.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I still really liked it, but just a logical part of my brain is like, this is actually makes sense. But ultimately, yeah, and ultimately, I do think it's cool. But I would say, even though they don't instantly become the TOS Vulcans, they do like a lot, though. They ditch, they totally destroy, what's it called, Central Command or whatever it was that was keeping the Earth down, and all of a sudden T'Pol's a part of the government. So that did happen. Seen that.
Yeah, that's true.
But anyway.
Yeah, no, come on. Vulcan is the place where science fiction and high fantasy meet, really, in the Star Trek universe. This, they're logical and spacefaring, but they do have magic neck pinches that can knock you out. So, and telepathy. So, I mean, this really kind of works for them. To me, it was just like, you're carrying around this object, this kind of triangular pyramidal object that I was just pleased hadn't broken in the multiple fights and sliding down cave tunnels and things like that during their journey. But it's also this incredible high-tech device as well that projects all of this stuff in the original writings and things like that. So yeah, is it a little over the top? Sure. Does it give you that big, satisfying visual that nobody can deny? And now here it is, all of his wisdom set forth, because it's obviously more than we just can put on a couple of sides right here. I think that was, kind of cool in its presentation. And yes, it pushes Voss over the hedge. And we always get excited when that person gets shot. I'm assuming stunned because he was alive afterwards. Though that would have wrapped things up real quickly. We shoot annoying people down. Up, you liar, you emotional bastard. But yeah, I think it was nice. I mean, you also get the kind of showing up of them in the robes and then doing the big reveal. Ha, it's actually us. And here's the big thing. Which is always, impressive and fun. Though I guess we talk about now the codes that they got from the husband. Are we going to talk about that later?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't planning on talking about it, so if you want to bring that up.
Again, it's just one of those things, like, to be honest, I thought that I saw him as one of the as the investigator. I confused him with the investigator in the first couple episodes, so I thought that he was already kind of against them. So it was nice to give the codes, but then it was like, okay, so I got your friends in. Also, here's the annulment that you wanted. I know you don't love me. Bye. Or let's wrap up that story arc.
I didn't bring up the husband because I thought this was not noteworthy. I didn't really like the whole storyline. Yeah, they introduced him like just a couple episodes prior to this, where they forced Paul to marry her, and now all of a sudden he's like, no, you can get the.
They needed to complicate the trip to Paul relationship.
Yeah, which I was not a fan of.
But yeah, I mean, that was it. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, it was fine. It was a typical Star Trek reveal, a little bigger than I thought that it was going to be, but it does give you that kind of satisfying visual to go ooh with.
The one thing I will say is that the shot of the Kir'shara lighting up and the majestic music was a much, 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 much better moment than Archer's hero shot in the episode 0 Hour at the end of season 3, where they show him going running with all the sparks flying in the background.
Yeah. Yeah, it cleanses that palette nicely.
That was way cheesier.
Yeah, I don't know how many people get this reference anymore, but I'm expecting the $6 Million Man noises when he's doing that. But yeah, it is way cheesy. I definitely agree.
All right, so leading on from that, so the Vulcans are no longer dickheads, and Enterprise is now fixed. So this is Manikoto fixing Enterprise. I think I've heard some people who criticize this episode who focus too much on this and the fact that Manikoto was going through and correcting a lot of stuff. And as you mentioned earlier, Talissa, that sometimes he over-explains stuff like, how the Klingons had that makeup change. I'm like, God damn it. Don't need that. But this is a case where it does, I think, need to be explained. And I actually think the episode does a really good job. Now, we already talked about how maybe it happened a bit too quickly. But I think it was absolutely necessary, and it's part of why I love this episode so much, why it hit my top 25, is because the Vulcans being dickheads was one of my biggest gripes from the first 2 seasons of Enterprise, because I think it was done for plot contrivance in order to create conflict, in order to have, oh, this is about the first humans going into space, so we have to have an opposing force that's opposing them. So let's say that the Vulcans are like keeping them down and don't trust them. That's out of character for the Vulcans. Not just that, all the specific episodes and specific appearances, the Vulcan being nothing but dickheads, felt totally wrong to me, and it pissed me off. It felt like easy, lazy writing because they just needed to have an antagonist. And so for them to go back and fix Saval's character and to fix Vulcans overall and explain, no, this is why they were dickheads, because there was corrupting assholes like Vlos, who was actually working for the Romulans, fucking everything up. But that's all fixed now. We're cool, and we have this like Sirach's teachings that we're going to follow. It's going to lead us to be even more cool. So I actually loved how all that was resolved. Talissa, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. That was probably my favorite part of these episodes, probably my favorite aspect of these episodes, that they fixed Enterprise. As I was annoyed too by the behavior of the Vulcans, that just, yeah, it was definitely plot contrivance, and they overdid it. It was just like, I just got annoyed by all of that. So for Manny Cotto to come in and say, no, actually, this is how the Vulcans are supposed to be, and this is how we're going to get them there. That really worked well for me. Yeah, maybe it happened a little bit too fast, but I still, like, I don't know, in my headcanon, like, they still have a lot of work to do. So maybe that's just in my headcanon. But I think this is the reason why, the pretty much the major reason why that this episode appears in my top 100 at all, because I really, really appreciate that they did this. That Manny Cotto said, "Okay, let's get rid of what," and without retconning, like they didn't retcon anything. They could have just retconned it and just drastically changed the Vulcan's behavior out of nowhere. But this was a much, much better way to do it. So I really, really appreciated it for these episodes for that.
I don't really have anything else to add on to that. But yeah, this is story evolution, I think, done the right way. And I think you pointed it out perfectly, Mark. This changes character perception and story around the Vulcans when we meet them next in the original series. And they're definitely much more religious oriented and such. And this sets the course of why that would be, and not so much what they have for the ridiculous antagonistic relationship at the beginning of the of Enterprise. Whereas the Klingon thing is, look, we can just accept as an audience that your quality and your makeup budget is going to be different between the 1960s and the 1980s. And we'll just, or even the 70s for a movie, late 70s for a movie. We as an audience can accept it and just move on. We don't need a justification. I mean, we won't get into the whole discovery bit of the third variation of Klingon that they brought in right there. But yeah, this is the thing. It's like, look, I don't need to see that. We could just buy that that's just the way things are. But to establish for a couple of seasons of Vulcans that are acting very un-Vulcan-like in our minds, to then going, oh, this is now why they're acting a little different, and involve characters and make it a big thing. And like I said, even part of really the baseline formation of the Federation, and that change being an important part of that, that's a cool thing to do. Because then, like you said, next time you see them, they're acting the way you would expect after a change like this. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then Jordan Johnson in the chat saying, I agree. I think about First Contact, they actually act like Vulcans in that movie. And that's right. Like in the movie, they like present it like a good thing. Like, oh, they're meeting the Vulcans. Isn't that cool? And the Vulcans are going to be cool. And then we come back 100 years later and they're dickheads. Which I think was a huge letdown.
Though, in a way, the little line that Saval does say is, you did in 100 years what took us 1800, can certainly set up a certain level of concern, like, okay, we found them, and then all of a sudden, man, they're getting this and this, and now they're heading up to warp 5 at this point, and what the heck, man, that took us a couple of weeks at least. They're doing it like in 3 days. And then having a Romulan, agent behind kind of the leading and who would be interacting with that further kind of like underlines why you might have a change like that. So the episode did a lot with its little bits.
Speaking of the Romulans, let's get to the final reveal of the. I didn't even realize until this year that the Romulan who shows up to Vloss was the same character of the Vulcan that attacked T'Pol, because it's also played by Captain Shaw, because he mentioned in an interview that, oh yeah, I played the Vulcan who was actually a Romulan. I was like, oh, he was? Oh, I didn't know that. But yeah, apparently that was the same character. But anyway, they reveal that Vloss is working for them, and he's like, oh, the unification of our people will be complete, which is sort of hinting at the whole unification thing that comes up in TNG. And I think this was it certainly sets up for the Babel 1, the trilogy they had with the Romulans appearing with that holographic ship or whatever. But I think moreover, I get the impression it's setting up for this Romulan war that was supposed to happen in season 5, but season 5 never happened, unfortunately, so we didn't get it. So I feel kind of let down by it. So I do see this ending as kind of, I guess it's necessary, I suppose, to show the Romulans are already starting to try to manipulate things behind the scenes, but it seemed kind of a dun 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 like twist kind of thing. But so I'm okay with it. I think you do kind of need it to explain away Vloss's behavior. But so yeah, Darren, what was your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it definitely. I was going to say it definitely feels like a setup that doesn't really pay off at any point. And I was going to ask if they had known when during season 4 did they realize, or did they get notice that they weren't going to be renewed?
I did hear about this. It was specifically during the filming of the episodes In the Mirror Darkly.
Oh wow! So towards the end, then.
Yeah, right towards the end. Yeah, so they didn't know. Although they could see the writing on the wall, they were.
Well, I mean, In a Mirror Darkly definitely feels like okay, we got to do a Mirror Universe episode, right? So let's have some fun with it, all right? That 2-episode arc really definitely feels like.
No, that was definitely we're getting canceled, so fuck it, we're just gonna have fun.
Yeah, totally. And it means nothing to anything else. There's no tie-in at all with the rest of the show, which is just awesome.
Although they did say if season 5 happened, they would have done an episode where they visited the Mirror Universe, which I'm not sure if I would have liked that, but anyway.
Yeah. And God, I thought Trip was Michael Bain in a guest role in this with the whole melted face. For some reason, I was seeing like aliens there, and I was like, man, they brought in Michael Bain to do with the. Oh no, that's just Trip with face makeup on. Okay, so I was a little disappointed in that, but that's not the episode we're talking about. Yeah. But yeah, I was curious about that, and so yeah, this feels like this is what they would be setting up for a season 5 that they ended up not getting. So that makes sort of a lot of sense, because I was like, wow, it feels like they're definitely moving some pieces around to do something, and just the show ends.
So what I want to know is, so it's about 100 years later or so in Amok Time, where you get the big scene where it's revealed the Romulans have pointy ears and goes da 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 da, and focuses in on. This ties back to, I think, was it the last episode we talked about, the Quality Mercy?
Yes. Yeah. I do want to correct you. You said Amok Time. It's actually Balance of Terror.
Oh yeah. That I was thinking Balance of Terror. I said the words Amok Time. Yes. Balance of Terror. Yes. It's probably because we were talking about Amok Time earlier.
Yes.
That was in my head. But yeah, and a Balance of Terror where they go da 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 and reveal that it's the Romulans, and Spock raises the eyebrow, and So how is it that 100 years earlier the Romulans already knew about it? And I don't know. It seems a little plot convenient to me, a way to kind of get the Romulans in there. But I mean, it's a lot of it is just. I think, yeah, and we've talked about this before with Balance of Terror that the writers at the time, since it was very early in the series, like didn't like imagine all of the canon. So the whole Romulan War thing really didn't make sense once the canon was further expanded. So it seems like Enterprise was, if you were talking about them doing a Romulan War in the 5th season, and then we do get a bit of this, and the 3-parter that comes later with what was it? Not Journey to Babel, but the 3-parter with the
Babel one, yeah.
Babel one. Yeah, that one we do get a little bit of probably a hint at where the direction that they would have gone in, which would have retconned things just a little bit. So I guess it is probably ultimately okay. We just didn't really get to see the fruition of it. But it did make me kind of wonder, like, so wait, how do the Romulans know about the fact that there used to be a unification of the two people, and the Vulcans don't know for another 100 years? But whatever. I mean, as you said, it did kind of at least explain to me Velas's behavior. I still think I thought he was a Romulan, which was totally explained why he was acting that way. But it is effective in that. But I do kind of wonder, like, how come they know about it, but the Vulcans don't learn for another 100 years?
Oh, do you want to answer Jordan Johnson's question in the chat? It's not Redcon, it's Retcon.
Oh yeah, retcon. To retroactively change canon. Not Redcon.
Yeah. Rick and Morty
change.
Rick and Morty had a really interesting episode about that, about the character of Retcon.
Yeah, I really like that actually. Retcon.
Also from Brandon, Captain Shaw was a Romulan. Should have been a T-shirt after Picard season 3 aired. Yes, that would have been awesome. Just people would be like, I got to get that shirt. I don't know what that means, but I got to get that shirt. Oh,
yeah. And they should just have a shirt with the image of what's Todd? Stashwick? Yeah, Todd Stashwick as a Romulan, and it has his face, and underneath it just says no.
Only very few select people would.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's a new thing. Actually, you can do character shirts. You can have Todd Stashwick on with the Captain Shaw and the Romulan on there.
Yeah.
You know, Jeffrey Combs obviously front and back with all the characters that he has played over the years. Was it like 10 different characters that he's played over the years?
It's been that many. I think it's like, what, 5?
It has. No, it has been 10.
It has.
Because he's had a couple one-offs.
Yeah.
He's always under the makeup, man.
He had like,
Romulan.
I know that, but I didn't think it. I thought I saw a meme with all of his characters. It was like 5 or 6.
No, yeah, I saw that meme as well. I thought, okay, so there was.
He also does the voice on Lower Decks.
Yeah. So he did the guy on Deep Space Nine before the dude in that horrible Meridian episode.
Yeah, so there was 3 on Deep Space
Nine,
1 on Voyager, 1 on Enterprise. Oh, maybe you're right. It's just 6, and then Lower Decks.
And then 6 on Lower Decks.
Yeah. Oh no, there was the Ferengi in Enterprise too. So it was 2 on Enterprise.
Oh, so yeah, 7. So 7. Okay.
Yeah. God, that episode sucked. Anyway.
We didn't meet the Ferengi for years later, man. What's going on with? I'm sorry. We won't get into that.
Anyway, yeah. So I think we have now covered the episode of Kir'shara. So now Going forward, Alyssa, I will know the answer to this question for you because you've gone through most of your top 100, but we'll ask the question anyway. Uh, where would you have this on your top 25 of Star Trek? Would it be higher, lower, or around the same? Alyssa?
Yeah, I think you pretty much, now that I'm up to number 6 in my top 100, you pretty much know the answer every time you do one of these videos. But yeah, and I remember when I did my first video, 100 through 76, you were like, oh, there's a couple ones in there in my top 25. And this is one of them. This
Yes, it
was
is.
in my very first video. This was number 96 for me. So I do want to just put this in context that as I mentioned in my last video, my last top 100 video, that just adding everything up on IMDb from the 5 Legacy series, and this is counting every two-parter as separate episodes, which I do a little differently. But there's 695 total episodes, so 100 out of 695. If you're in that top 196, that's good. So that's a good episode. Anything in the top 100, I consider to be a great episode. I just don't have it as high as number 19. There's definitely a difference between 96 and 19. So I definitely don't have it as highly ranked as you, and I think it does have everything to do with I just could not buy this that this Vulcan would be so, this Romulan pretending to be a Vulcan would be so deeply embedded in the Vulcan government, and that everybody would just let him go for so long. And because he was so over the top. So that's what keeps it from being this high. However, again, it's in my top 100. So a lot of the things that we've talked about, especially the connection that it makes, and that fixing Enterprise without retconning things a little too much. Like, it is really, really good. So there's a lot of really wonderful things about this, which puts it in my top 100. But that Vulcan leader guy keeps it from being this high, and it is therefore at number 96 in my top 100.
And I do believe that there isn't a single entry in my top 25 that is not in your top 100. So I think every episode that's in my top 25 is somewhere in your top 100. So anyway, Darrin, now same question to you. Would you have this higher, closer to number 1, around the same, or lower?
It might be a little lower, about the same to lower, simply because it's a newer episode in my viewing list. And kind of like we've had the conversation before, you're comparing some shows that have sat in the back of your psyche for years and years, and some that are a little fresher, and it's sort of hard to see where it's going to play out. Like I said, talking about it more, I definitely realized there are a lot more moments and things and kind of like, world building that happens into this episode. So I definitely, see where it would be about this level in here. I just don't know if I can compare it so much with some of the episodes, again, that I've seen for longer periods of time. Where is this going to set with me? So I would say at this level, maybe a little bit lower. But it does, again, there's a lot that goes on in this. And I really like a lot of the character stuff that sort of evolves through this episode.
Yeah, playing off of what, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
What Darrin was talking about, I was also going to mention too that I should point out that no episode of Enterprise is higher than number 21 for me.
Yeah.
So I don't have any episode of Enterprise this high. And you mentioned you have 2 in your top 10, and it is everything to do with just exactly what Darrin was talking about. It is not because I don't like Enterprise as much. In fact, in the 5 Legacy series, I have this ranked 4th above Voyager. I have Voyager at 5th. So it's not that I don't like Enterprise. It's just that my appreciation of it comes more from recent years. And it's not something... In recent years, I mean like 15, 20 years. And I haven't watched them 100 times. It hasn't really sat with me and really like gotten into my psyche. And that is the only reason why the best Enterprise episode for me is number 21. because and that's it. Not because I don't like Enterprise, not because I don't think they have some really great episodes, but exactly what Darren was talking about. That it's a little harder when the episodes haven't really sat with you for years and years and years, and you watch them 100 times, which is the case of every episode of my top 10. Definitely, are episodes that are like that.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm probably different because it has sat with me longer. I definitely haven't seen Enterprise as often as the other 4 Legacy series. Well, maybe some of Voyager's around the same, but I remember watching it when it first came out, and I've seen it multiple times since then. So yeah, I'm probably more familiar with it, and so yeah.
And just to clarify from our previous conversation, it is 10 characters that Jeffrey Combs has played over Star Trek, including Tyron the Cerulean from DS9, Brunt the Ferengi from DS9, of course, Weyun, sorry, for ages. He's also done the holosuite character Officer Kevin Mulcahy.
Okay.
Okay, that's one I didn't know about.
Didn't know about that one.
Penk on Voyager, and then of course we have him playing Shran.
Officer Kevin Mulcahy. No, I don't count that. You know who that is?
I'm just saying. He's also done a video game, Star Trek.
Video games don't.
The evil computer on Lower Decks. And he actually had a role in DS9's finale as a holosuite guest with no lines, just him in the background playing there. So yeah,
I don't count this.
As I said,
okay, so 9. Sorry, no, then Officer McCabe. Screw him, man.
Officer McCain. You said it was a holosuite. Are you sure you're not talking about the what was the Beyond the Stars where he plays an officer? But
that's probably what it was.
That's the one. That's the one. Sorry.
That's just a different version of Weyun.
It's a different version of Weyun. That totally doesn't count. Video games do not count. Him sitting there in the background does not count. 7, as I said.
You hear that, Jeffrey? Those rules don't count. Don't put them on your resume, man.
Video games aren't canon. Video games do not count.
I'm just saying they're Star Trek characters. I'm looking at Screen Rant wouldn't lie to me. So I can't keep a straight face saying it. Okay.
And I just want to say in the chat, Brandon, I'm disappointed in you that you don't remember my top 25 because don't remember. He's saying as high as 21. Well, that's high for you. Well, didn't you see my top 25? Where did that? But anyways,
masterpieces, all of them.
Anyway, so that's it. I think we're gonna wrap things up now. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. Everyone in the chat. You had Jordan Johnson and Brendan Neal House. Thank you so much for joining in the chat. Great to have you there, and of course everyone watching live and everyone else watching in the archives. And of course, big thanks, special shout outs to my guests, Alyssa, Jean, and Darren. Thank you so much for joining. Now, if you want to give a quick shout out of what you're up to, where people can find you, Alyssa, we'll start with you.
Yeah, you can find me on Alyssa Jean's reviews, and currently I am doing weekly reviews for 2 different shows, which is very rare for me. It's very rare that I do 2 shows at once, but I am doing Star Wars Ahsoka, which is coming out on Tuesdays, and I'm trying to get my videos out Tuesday night. Generally, last week I had to watch the episode a couple times, so it took me till Wednesday to get it out. But generally, Tuesday nights I got Ahsoka reviews coming out, and then generally Thursday afternoon-ish, you can find my Lower Decks reviews, Star Trek Lower Decks. I'm super excited about season 4. We got episode 4 coming up. And also, as I've alluded to, I'm in the midst of my Star Trek Top 100. I'm now all the way up to number 6. So go ahead and check all of that out on Alyssa Jean's reviews.
And I'm D from D's Reviews. We're also doing Ahsoka live Thursday nights at 6 o'clock Pacific. Alyssa was just on. We've got Don Willie coming up this week. And then Mark's going to come back for the finale at the beginning of October. So that's Thursday nights at 6. That's pretty much it going on right now. Do want to mention, of course, we still have the strikes going on right now, though it does appear that the WGA and the AMPTP, that's the Producers Guild, will be meeting on Wednesday. So negotiations may be picking back up. They know if they don't finish it by October 1st, that the whole season's going to be shot. The fall season is already gone. So hopefully that and the money that the studios are losing will be an incentive to, hey, maybe treat people fairly. Let's get some fair contracts signed. Let's get people paid for the work that they do. And everybody can go back to work making awesome, cool, creative things.
I've been amazed, reading about this and some negotiations that already take place about how much the producers are acting like cartoon villains. Like they literally acting like corporate villains from movies about offering some actors some things and other actors nothing in order to pit them against each other. And I'm like, what the fuck is it? Why are you acting like you're cliche?
Well, what makes me think of is producer guy from how he's always all he ever cares about is money. He's like, oh, I don't know if that's a good idea. It's a franchise that made $1 billion. Oh yeah, I like that idea. He's always all about money, and it's just like they're just living up to that caricature perfectly. Like they're actually fitting in to that caricature.
No, everything is turning into like an old 80s John Cusack movie at this point, where you've got the people are just trying to get together and get some work done, and you've got the upper crust rich people are just trying to keep everyone down and laugh with their expanding lobster
they
franchises.
smoke their cigars and burn their
exactly. But it's kind of, again, not to go off on a diatribe or anything like this, it is kind of like countrywide, system-wide. We've got the auto workers are on strike against the big three right now. The writers, directors, we got the AIATSE, which is all the crew people maybe going on. There's a potential strike that's being voted on by SAG-AFTRA right now to go against interactive media. That's your video game companies. There's been hotel strikes. There's a lot of
the special effects, the digital effects industry as well.
Exactly. But I mean, not just Hollywood, but across multiple fields, there is a lot of pushing and strikes when you have CEOs making tons of money and people having to get 2-3 jobs because they're making minimum wage in order to just pay their rent and go back to work. So I'm hoping maybe we're moving closer to our Star Trek future. Okay, let's tie it up right there. Hopefully these are the directions. For fair compensation, we're going to treat our planet better, treat each other better, and then we can reach to the stars.
No, Darren, we haven't had the eugenic wars yet.
Oh no! I don't want.
We still need Khan to come in.
No, someone's now going to just do a picture with Trump and Khan monched together. That's master. Why'd you have to say that? I was trying to end it on a good note, Alyssa.
I'm just going by canon, that's all.
That is true. That is true.
Well, one thing, getting back to Ahsoka, the one thing I did want to say is that I want to bring up how happy I am that they're releasing it at 9 p.m. East Coast time instead of 3 in the freaking morning, and all you West Coasters were gloating, oh, I got to watch it at midnight. And I was like, I'm not going to stay up till 3 a.m. to watch the damn thing. So, of course,
I can watch it at 6 p.m. while I'm eating my dinner.
And the internet is horrid with spoilers. It annoys me so much how often people are like, spoiler alert, then 2 lines down, they're like, oh my god, Anakin's back and he attacked Vader and he rejected his Vaderism and here's a picture of the scene, right? Like, come on, folks, give me at least a couple of hours to watch this. If I don't stay up on Tuesdays, I can't even look at my phone until like afternoon or I get home from work. No, folks, come on, be nice. Yeah, the 6 o'clock, the prime time release, just at least give people a chance.
I met a few people who were surprised, who watched that episode maybe a couple days or a week later, and they were surprised. Oh, Anakin appears. I'm like, how did you not get spoiled? Like, how did you manage that?
They're Facebook friends with just this guy named Paul, and he's in Helsinki, and that's about it. That's that's their only outreach they get.
So anyway, my name's Mark. My channel is Enchantment of Eternity. I'm like Alyssa, also covering 2 shows at once. Same 2 shows, Lower Decks and Ahsoka, week to week. And still going back and reviewing some older episodes of Star Trek Next Generation and other random videos and whatnot. I just released my season 6 retrospective review of Better Call Saul. It's really out of nowhere, but I promised everyone I would do it a year after that show ended, and it's been a year, so went and did that. So you can check that out on my channel and check out all the other stuff I'll be doing, Star Trek videos, continuing to count down my top 25 monthly. So thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you all next time. Gotta do this for this one.